Hello, 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 everyone. Nick Ottinger here once again in Xfinity series with Team Conti Sim Performance at a Kansas Speedway. So obviously a pretty different track type that we've been accustomed to the last 2 weeks. Bristol and the Watkins Glen that we've had. Now we're going to a Kansas Speedway, something that is definitely dependent on having some downforce at a certain phase of a run, but also having it kind of trimmed for some straight line speed and drivability. So to kind of give you guys baseline, I done a 30 lap run here on our looser variation this week, and majority of this run is going to be on the bottom side of the track. So kind of go into depth in that a little bit. It's probably going to fluctuate quite a bit throughout the week. Bottom might be optimal, some track temps, some ultimately wind direction and variation that way might play a factor into it a lot more. But I feel like this track's going to be pretty raceable in each lane. You just kind of have to find that limitation and diagnose where to kind of fix that, right? Whatever lane you're in, like determine where your minimum speed's going to be and just not driving in too deep and costing yourself your momentum base for sure. So, kind of diving in that a little bit. Obviously, we're starting our run here, first lap on the bottom. The last 2 or 3 laps, I'm going to show you guys how I ran the top side and kind of the handling characteristics of the car, and kind of debrief on how the handling changes and transitions. So I'm going to let this go for 1 or 2 laps and without talking and see so you guys can kind of have a good visual and then show you guys obviously what's happening and let it roll here. 2 laps here, obviously, our second or third laps, depending on which lane choice you run, right? That's something we cover in the notes quite often here at TCSP. If you guys look at them, and that is determine which is your optimal lane. Is there any additional lane choices that are possible? And I touched base on it earlier in this video. This is definitely one of those tracks that you have lane options that are going to be ever changing, evolving throughout a race with track rubber, looking for clean air, where to kind of judge getting your runs and where to judge going into those lanes and then possibly exiting at a different lane too. So obviously, first couple laps here, I'll dissect it on this third lap as well. If you guys noticed, I'm not fully lifting, early on in this run. And this is even on the bottom side. You can tell, I'll back this up a little bit. I'm shaping my wheel input into kind of loading this right edge of the splitter and loading this front edge of the splitter at a consistent avenue. And what I mean by that, when I get to this compression zone, when I'm loading into this banking, I want to make sure I have wheel load to the front tires and wheel shaping to where I'm just consistent with it. And I'm not too abrupt at turning down into turn one, for instance, here. You can tell I'll start decelerating and I'll start shaping some wheel input, but I'm not fully off the throttle. And this is to keep the car stable on entry. This is to make sure I'm getting into this compression zone I was talking to you guys about, at a precise avenue, obviously a precise speed, but not so abrupt when I actually fully land into the banking. Later through a run and how this car will transition, it's gonna change. It's gonna change quite a lot for our philosophy on building the car here. So and how we run the track. So you can tell I'm keeping this part throttle, stabilizing kind of when this right side crosses this imaginary seam you're going to see there, but I'm keeping it very consistent part throttle until I recognize I got the car stable enough, the car has all the grip that I need to without really slipping any of the right rear tire or right front because I'm carrying too much speed here. So I'm trying to refine my point. I know I need to keep wrapping this weight line and getting really the left front as close to this weight line without crossing into the banking, variation here. And that's just if I cross this left edge and even clip the left edge of the splitter on this apron, which is honestly is going to be like right here, you're going to have a lot of issues because you're going to actually point this car back straight because it's clipping it. And you're going to get offline, you're going to get off, you're going to get off center on what you need to be doing your input wise, and you're going to cost you momentum doing that majority of times because you're going to have a lot more of an abrupt exit than what you're planning for if you're wrapping it further. So I'll keep doing this at a slower rate. And now, it may be hard to see on the video here, but you're going to see, let me just get this a little bit closer. This is the seam I was talking to you guys about when you're actually crossing it into turn one. So when your right sides cross it, you may have a little bit more of a pitch in the car and pivot, I would say, actually going into turn one, and that's a lot of times contingent on how you guys are crossing this seam, for sure. And you're gonna have that on exit of two quite often. So that exit of turn two here, it comes up pretty quick, especially when you're running the bottom. You got to be pretty committed. You got to have the car rotate, and you got to kind of have a naturally free car from this point. You know, when you're actually crossing these seams and getting to the right close. Yeah, I would say close to this wall at the ethanol. That's about where the safer barrier ends. Um, I know I was kind of confusing you guys there, but I was looking at my marker there for you guys so you guys can kind of see where you need to make sure you're not pushing a push loose into this car before this point. And it's very contingent when you're crossing this seam not to put a push after you cross it and shape your full exit like really early to the weight, paint. Um, because you're just narrowing that exit is what you're doing. If you actually can tell again, I'll do a different view here. Hopefully I can kind of showcase this here. Yep. Okay. Back this up a little bit. I know it's not got a great camera angle, but you can tell here how much, we're not trying to cut this narrow exit up. You see how much the wall kind of flows back out, bellows back out late, but the wall still is relatively straight here. So that's just what you got to look at for this exit if you're running the bottom. More often than not, that's what gets people in trouble at this track more often because of how much it narrows at that exit and then opens back up. A lot of people time when you cross this seam I was talking about. A lot of people time to where they're so heavy in the throttle they're causing a really big push in the front end, and they'll basically widen the exit way too early, and run into the wall here. So, and that's just again on the bottom line, something to kind of think about and everything like that. So, kind of change that up. Go back to the cockpit here. I'll transition to turn 3 and 4 to talk about that. Turn in point is pretty reasonable. It's before the safer barrier starts, and then turn 3 before you see the color change, obviously, of the green to the white wall. And I basically try pinpointing where I want to start decelerating and shaping more wheel input. As you can tell, I'll shape more wheel input once I get to my lowest point of throttle, and I try basically manage my momentum loss at that point. I just try maintaining that speed to know where I have the balance I need to for this section. So slow this up. And our testing weather, just to let you guys know, turns 3 and 4 is the more neutral, the free state of the track, I would say, comparing to turn 1 and 2 when you are running the bottom. So just keep that in mind if you're testing in this weather. And again, it's going to change. It's going to evolution, have a good evolution to the track and especially factor that in with wind variation, everything like that. You might have this handling in turn 1 and 2 on just how free you are in our testing weather, and it might change throughout the week the way you're lap free in turn 1 and 2. So just keep that in mind. You know, it's pretty simple in how you're looking to just keep this left edge not to the apron again. Same mindset that you have for 1 and 2. Just don't clip the left edge of the splitter on the apron. Get offline and find this point where you're going to have a straight exit as much as you can without having to do too many micro adjustments in the wheel. So this is just the first couple of laps, just trying to explain that to you guys. I'll go to about a lap 20, give you guys a good baseline for how it changes. And I don't know why this just changed, but let's get my camera off. That's probably why. And show what this looks like. Let this play out. All right. Something to talk about again is early on we could stay a lot more part throttle, have a little less variation when I am decelerating. I have to kind of pinpoint at that load point again how much I want to kind of roll off the throttle. And there was a brief point I was completely off the throttle to kind of set the nose and rear together to not one be the rear too dominant and the front be too tight because I'm carrying too much speed. So you gotta have precision here, and that's where it comes from. Your entry, pretty simple. You gotta have your entry dialed in to make sure you have a really good center and mid exit and full exit. So as cliche as it is, every corner exit has a corner entry. So you gotta kind of work it in that order of entry, center, and exit. See how much it changed again, full lift, part throttle, definitely part throttle a lot longer compared to our sticker tires where they're a lot colder and build in the temperature. So pretty reasonable, right? Like you just try to manage that entry, stability, make sure you're trying to regain that momentum, center the exit. Now I'll show you guys the top line here as well. I was pretty good. I only, just for note purposes, I started on lap 27 to go to the top side. You can see a little bit of time difference and see how much time I picked up. So let this play out. We'll talk about it for a minute. All right. So top side lap. Like I said, lane variation. You know, our car this week's probably going to have a little bit of a tighter phase from lap 7, possibly to 15, and that may extend to lap 20, just depending on how aggressive you are those first 7 laps before you get to that phase. So it's something to be mindful on that as well. And additionally on this lap, we're going to go through here. This top line, I would say comparing to the bottom line at this stage, you're going to be noticeably more free because you're carrying more overall momentum through the corner, right? Like you're not having to get off the throttle as much. You're still having to decrease your throttle to a certain range, but you majority of the time you're going to be able to stabilize your entry and keep more center speed and overall speed throughout the corner. So it's going to be a freer balance. If you enter basically near this seam, you're going to break it free a lot easier. So if you can find your balance, you know, basically about a tire width, 2 tire widths off the wall, you're going to find a pretty stable entry and center to where you can get on the throttle. But finding out how much throttle you could use, that's where this track is pretty tricky. You know, it's a little bit of an area where you just need to manage your part throttle and manage your momentum. You can tell how much I'm playing with the throttle here, and that's just to manage the exact point I know I need to get the car to start straightening up with not having so much handling, you know, conditions that are just being thrown at me. So if I can manage my center to mid exit here, turn off the wall, I get to this dashed line. I think that's going to be a good marker for you guys to understand. Okay, that's where I know I need to be almost full throttle by this point, right? So you're going to have a lot better ability to make sure that is your wide open throttle moment. And if you can kind of get to it consistently, you're going to be better off for it. And again, 3 and 4, like I mentioned earlier, on cold tires and on the bottom line is the more free side. Here, all center momentum. And it's very tricky because you feel a lot more potential in the center of 3 and 4 than you do in 1 and 2. So you'll start, as a driver, you'll start cutting the exit, to get right on top of this seam. But for how this track is, it has a much more narrow exit of turn 4 than turn 2. So it's it's a tough one to kind of advocate for crossing that seam or staying right on top of it, when you're maximum throttle, like a wide open throttle, because it just takes one small like degree of correction to where you're lined up straight towards this wall, and you clip it and you pretty much just broadsided the right side of the car and hurt, the toe, and pretty much damage that you have to really focus on fixing. So keep that in mind. You don't really want to cross this seam too early, and you want to make sure you have a stable approach all the way through center to mid-exit here, so you're not hitting this wall. So something to keep in mind for this week. Going to have a lot of pressure situations of battling for clean air, and I mean that's the name of the game, right? Always trying to find your clean air, and just focusing on keeping your momentum loss kind of consistent, and then finding your point where you need to get to wide open throttle, without having to kind of decrease that throttle again for exit. So stable entry, find your minimum loss in speed. Even if you got to lift earlier, that's fine. This is a momentum based track for on throttle. It's a lot of on throttle time, and you can definitely bite yourself when you're on the throttle too heavy. So if you guys got any questions, please reach out. Always free on Discord. You can drop me a message on there or in our channel that you guys are a part of in Discord. So please don't be afraid to tag me and ask any questions that you guys have. Um, let's have a good week. Let's see how this week kind of progresses. Another week that we have a new, obviously the physics updated to here. So just another new opportunity, new challenges. So let's see what we got, gentlemen.